All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jen Bernardi, the Executive Director of Ford Hall Forum, and before we begin, I have a few announcements. This event is being recorded and will be available free to subscribers on Comcast Xfinity in the Public Affairs folder. The forum will also post it in a few weeks on YouTube and iTunes University. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to be alerted when it posts. If you are sharing a comment or question in the second half of the program, please speak directly into this or the other microphone over there so that both the audience and the video camera will pick up your voice. Please understand that by speaking, you are giving Ford Hall Forum permission to record you. I will be your social media VJ for the evening, projecting pictures and quotes and facts to complement the conversation. If you prefer to share a question or comment via Twitter, please tweet to @FordHallForum or use hashtag FHF. Please take a moment now to silence your phones. Ford Hall Forum thanks its generous sponsors, including, among others, the Lowell Institute and Suffolk University. Ford Hall Forum also thanks its members whose generosity makes free public forum events possible. If you are not a member yet, please become one today by visiting the information table before you leave. Our moderator for this evening is Don Tye. Don is a trial attorney whose practice focuses on civil, probate, and domestic relations litigation, as well as appeals. He has more than 30 years' experience as an attorney, guardian ad litem, master, mediator, arbitrator, author, and lecturer. Don has given lectures at such esteemed institutions as Suffolk University School of Law and other dumps like Harvard Law. He has also spoken at the American Psychological Association, Boston Public Schools, and the Maine, Massachusetts, and Boston Bar Associations, among others. Don has been recognized as a Massachusetts super lawyer, a New England super lawyer, and one of the top 100 lawyers in Massachusetts as featured in Boston Magazine. Most importantly, Don Tye has been a Ford Hall Forum board member for 32 years and still only 33. You're looking good, Don. Please, everyone, give a warm welcome to our moderator, Don Tye.
Well, this is not about me, it's about those three people sitting there. So that's the applause I hope will happen at the end of the program. It's my distinct honor at this program called Going to Pot to introduce really three very distinguished guests. Kara Crabb-Burnham has been active with Emerson College students for SSDP, the Sensible Drug Policy, since its inception 5 years ago, serving first as the Charter Secretary and then as Vice President. Later, she became the Massachusetts Chapter Coordinator for National SSDP, working with student leaders across the state. In addition, Kara was the first person to organize an SSDP chapter to march in the Boston Pride Parade and recruited volunteers for the 2010 Boston Freedom Rally. Now the president of MassCan, Normal, the Massachusetts Cannabis Reform Coalition. You can hear her on UN regular radio doing the Boston Pot Report. Oh, I've got to turn on that. And occasionally on THC with Stephen Epstein and Mike Crawford. Kara, we really look forward to hearing from you. Next to Kara is Eric Steenstra. Eric is the Executive Director of Hemp Industries Association, HIA, which represents the interests of the hemp industry and encourages the research and development of new products made from industrial hemp. Eric is also president of the board of Vote Hemp, through which he educates people on the issues surrounding hemp. And you'll tell us what hemp is, I'm sure. Registers voters and builds coalitions to create an acceptance of and a free market for this fiber. Steenstra, Eric, was given an HIA Hemp Achievement Award for his investigations and meetings involving the DEA and NAFTA challenge, as well as his televised debates on the topic. Thank you, Eric. And Michael Head. Michael is the research economist at the Beacon Hill Institute. He produces readable analyses of current public policy issues for voters, taxpayers, opinion leaders, and policymakers. At the Beacon Hill Institute, Michael is involved in both STAMP, modeling, as well as various research projects. Michael holds a BS in interdisciplinary mathematics from the University of New Hampshire and a Master of Science in Economic Policy from Suffolk. With these three people, I look forward to a very stimulating lecture. Thank you. And I guess we'll begin with Kara.
Okay.
Okay.
Have a seat.
Thanks.
There you go. Go ahead.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Ready.
Kara, do you want
Question?
do you want to, I'm not sure, are we going to have the discussion, or are
Yep.
we going to have, okay.
Yep, you can go ahead and have a discussion. You can feed them questions.
All right. So the question is really, Kara, why don't you tell us really what your involvement is within this subject of going to pot, where you stand here.
As I've been an activist, I stand with the full legalization of cannabis, 100% with no exceptions, that everybody who wants to use cannabis, that is, I would say 18, but most voters would probably say 21, should have access to reasonably priced cannabis that is not overly taxed, but taxing, non-taxation I don't see as an option, a viable option. And I see, once we've accomplished that goal and we've actually made cannabis legal across the country, I see jobs. I see jobs, I see industry, I see revenue, I see people being able to finally build their dream house, I see people being able to move into careers that once they hated, now they love. I see just people being able to move up in the world doing what they love and being able to be proud of it.
Kara, my wife gave me a copy of the New England Psychologist last night that has an article, Legalization of Marijuana Could Harm Young Users. And it talks about, it talks about a once-a-week use not being safe and may result in addictive and neurocognitive damage, especially in young people. And the article goes on and talks about the harm that marijuana can do, even if the age for legalization is 21 and over. When things get legalized, there's a trickle-down effect, and young people may be able to more easily access it and harm themselves. Now, she sent this article to my kids, and I'm just wondering how you react to something like this and the research that's going on in taking the stand that you do.
Well, I think that I'd want to see the study, how they conducted it. I think that there's a lot of chemicals that are readily available to people of any age on store shelves every day that they can overdose on. Doctors give out prescriptions to people, overly prescribed medications on a regular basis that can be very harmful to the body and have long-term effects. And I see that prohibition has allowed for youth to have more access to cannabis than alcohol is available to youth. If you're under 21 and you want to drink all night, you have to find somebody who's over 21 to purchase these beverages for you, this alcohol for you. And that is becoming more and more difficult as people understand, if you get in trouble, you can lose your house, you can lose your kids, you can, get kicked out of school, if you're in college. So I see a lot less of that happening. And what I understand is that leads to more underage people being able to wanting to get what they can. So if they can go to the black market, then they'll go to the black market. And if cannabis is taken away from the black market and put into regulated market, they'll have less access.
What kind of regulations do you see being necessary in order to do this? People talk about legalizing other kinds of activities that prostitution and alcohol at any age. I mean, what regulation do you see is happening?
It's a matter of freedom. We should be free Americans to use our bodies how we see fit. If somebody wants to put themselves at risk with a drug or with a prostitute or with a car, that's their right. That's freedom. That's what America's all about. We're supposed to be free to do what we want, to live how we want. I believe that responsible use is essentially important, and education is a huge factor in that. And if we do begin legalization and regulation across the country, that we need to definitely step up through the public schooling system and be teaching the youth more accurate, scientific-based information about drugs and what they are, how they affect the body. And I think that would be the first way to keep youth from starting drugs earlier, from starting something that they shouldn't necessarily start until they're an adult, till they're more responsible, till they're more aware of their body and what they can handle.
Eric, what's your perspective on this subject of legalizing marijuana?
Well, we focus mostly on industrial hemp, and just to be clear for the audience, industrial hemp is varieties of cannabis. It's typically below 1%. In many countries, it's regulated at 0.3%, whereas marijuana varieties of cannabis typically start at around 5% and go on up to 20%. So, if you smoke hemp, you're not going to get anything but a headache. It's kind of, the DEA actually refers to hemp as ditchweed in their reports. And I think most marijuana smokers wouldn't be too interested in that. So it's a little different thing. And there are cannabinoids in all varieties of cannabis. And it's not just THC, but, so in terms of my perspective in general, I think that the drug war policies it's been a complete failure. And that the whole, hemp got caught up in this whole thing. I don't think when they originally made the first laws against cannabis, the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937, they didn't even know what THC was, and there was a lot of demonization and whatnot. And certainly I agree with Kara on the freedom perspective that we think farmers should be able to grow a crop if they want to grow it, especially when there's all this economic development opportunities. The Hemp Industries Association monitors the sales of hemp products at retail, and we're watching how fast they're growing every year. And so in 2013 there was $184 million worth of hemp foods and body care products sold in the United States. 100% of that was imported from foreign countries. It makes no sense whatsoever that American farmers, American businesses, American farmers can't grow it here. American businesses have to import it and can't work with it here. It restricts research. There's all sorts of things like that. So I think the policy is, it's a failure. And clearly, like I said, my focus is a little more on the hemp side, but I think that the whole policy has been a bad one.
So do you find resistance to your development of your industry from people who are opposed to the legalization of marijuana smoking?
Well, yeah, absolutely. We have historically found a lot of resistance from people who are opposed to marijuana and who feel like they should prohibit all forms of cannabis. The DEA has taken that position, and in fact, the DEA eradicates an incredible amount of marijuana every year. Well, the Vermont State Auditor did an investigation of that, and they found that 96% of all the marijuana that was being seized by the DEA, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of plants, was actually wild hemp that was completely worthless, ditchweed. So it was really, turns out it's more of a summer jobs program for police. And some of those interests are what's affecting this. The police were concerned about losing money for their budgets to go fly around and seek out these wild, I mean, they do find some marijuana, but if you look at the cost of the program, it was a complete boondoggle. So, yeah.
Is this caught up? Are these two activities caught up? Your concern about legalizing marijuana and your concern about developing a viable hemp industry? Do you find that they're crisscrossing in the highway?
Well, I think it's inevitable that the policy against cultivation of cannabis or banning marijuana affected hemp, and whether it be recreational or medical or hemp or whatever, the whole thing has been banned since 1970 outright, and so hemp is caught up in that, and I think it's been a huge stumbling block. On the other hand, when we talk to legislators and policymakers, they like to look at the issues separately. They like to look at hemp as one thing and think about the merits of whether or not, you know, a farmer should be able to grow hemp versus, you know, what Kara's talking about, you know, recreational or medicinal use of marijuana. There's different arguments for that, and I think they, you know, when they're looking at the policy, they want to look at each of those separately and craft policies based on the individual arguments. So at least that's what we hear.
Eric, just one more thing. Are there other states that have that don't legalize marijuana but actually have a viable hemp industry?
That don't legalize marijuana? Yeah, I mean, Kentucky's an example of that. They have not legalized marijuana in Kentucky, but they have legalized hemp. There's a number of other states as well. You know, and there's some states like Colorado and Washington that are allowing hemp and also allowing, you know, regulated marijuana. So I think that's absolutely the case, and we think it's the bill that we have pending in Congress would allow states to choose whether or not they want to regulate, you know, hemp production. So,
Mike, where do you stand in terms of, tell us about the economics behind what you're hearing from these two policy positions?
Well, I mean, first of all, prohibition certainly hasn't succeeded in keeping marijuana out of the hands of children. I mean, you've seen there's numerous surveys out there that range, you know, 80 to 90% of high school students believe it's easy to get marijuana and have access to it. So prohibition really hasn't worked in eliminating, you know, youth consumption of it. But similar like cigarettes. Cigarettes are illegal for children under the age of 18. But they're still accessible. And I think one of the things that has led to the decrease in the consumption of cigarettes, and I think with marijuana as well, is education of it. You know, students are realizing that if you smoke, you know, you're gonna have lung issues, you have cancer issues, and I think that's part of the reason that we've seen the decrease in cigarette consumption, and I think the same type of policy can hold true for marijuana. You know, in Colorado, which is legalized, the retail of it this year to people over the age of 21, they recently had a sting trying to send youth in to buy marijuana, people that were under the age of 21, and they had 0% success rate. So I think that, you know, with a legalized industry, you have individuals that have this profit motive to keep their license, to keep their ability to sell marijuana, and they don't want to risk this by getting it in the youth's hands, by giving, you know, fodder to headlines. So I think the regulation, legalization, just education in general of it will do a much better job at informing individuals so they can make decisions.
Go ahead, please.
I think also, you know, that age cohort, you know, the 16 to 19 to 20-year-old, that it's a time in your life where you want to push boundaries. You want to see what you can get away with. If you take the cool factor of this is illegal and I'm not supposed to have this and it's bad out of the equation, it's far less attractive. Like in Europe, with alcohol, you can drink at any age in Europe. They have rules; they're not enforced. But if you see how people in their communities behave, you have, you know, at 14, 15, you have wine with dinner, and it's not a big deal. In Germany, you have beer at a young age. It's very common. And then once they're older and they are going out on a regular basis and they are enjoying more nightlife, they're far more responsible with their use. And they've had, if they were to have a negative experience, it would have already been in front of their family. So if you take that cool factor away, that I'm breaking the rules factor, you have a lot less allure to a drug or any substance.
How did you happen to get involved in this? You don't look like the traditional...
I don't look like a stoner?
No, thank you. I mean, how did you get involved in this industry? Or
I really like smoking pot. I can't lie. I went to the Freedom Rally many years ago. I can't remember what year it was. And I was walking through the park, and there was this lovely woman, Stacia Cosner, who is now the associate director at SSDP. And she said, "Hey, are you a student?" And I had just re-enrolled to go to Emerson. And I was like, I said yes. And she said, "Start a chapter." And I said, "Have other people from my school signed up?" And they had. So there was an email that went out, and then there was a meeting, and there were more meetings, and now there's lots and lots of meetings. But the radio show, Boston Pot Report, that you mentioned earlier, it's actually on WEMF radio now. But other than that.
Well, you know, edibles like cookies and gummies can be laced at very high dosages. We know very little about high dosage marijuana. All of the studies are based on lower dosages. Unless you're legalizing the THC level, people are going to make products that are more addictive. Aren't we really opening ourselves up to a whole Pandora of problems with people at these kids that want to sort of express their freedom and find that they're addicted to something that's really going to cause major problems that we really don't know the implications of?
I think addiction is the wrong word there, sir. Dependency, habit forming. Addiction is inaccurate. There are no serious long-term withdrawal symptoms that are what defines addiction. So, no, because you can't become addicted. No, I don't see a problem.
And Mike, do you see the issue of medical marijuana and medical uses of marijuana as being something that's sort of sweeping the country?
Yeah, I mean,
certainly is overseas.
Yeah, I mean, it's much more, you know, looking back at the landscape 10 years ago, something like that, you know, it's much more prevalent now. It seems like it sort of operates on a bit of a pendulum. You know, in the late 60s, early 70s, you had a lot of decriminalization, a lot of movements in that direction. Early in the 80s, you know, you had the exact opposite. You had DARE, you had the war on drugs, and that came into play. And now it's swinging back the other way, where you're seeing a lot of surveys, you know, a lot of questionnaires, you know, and just in general, you know, the democratic process of people being elected that are more open to both medical marijuana and legalized marijuana in general.
Don, we have some questions that folks tweeted in beforehand. If you would humor me, I'd like to throw one out there. One came in from a gentleman named Eric, who is asking what the speakers think of Charlotte Green. She was in the news recently. She was a reporter. And when it was found out that she owned the Alaskan Cannabis Club, she quit on air, knowing that she would be fired. And the question is generally, what do you speakers think about that? That this, I think essentially that this person had a job that she had to pick between her job as a reporter and the head of the Alaska Cannabis Club.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's her choice. I mean, that's great for her. You know, she had a different job lined up and she wanted to. She could certainly go out with the bang. It's probably not the way I would recommend burning a bridge when you leave a job, but I mean, if you want to change industries, you know, good for her.
It's unfortunately that I don't think that she necessarily chose the best verbiage for television at prime time. We've all seen it. And I think it's really unfortunate. A lot of activists face this problem. A lot of us. Are you terrified to talk about your friends and what you do on the weekends at work? It's not a fair situation for those of us who have to, you know, have a job that doesn't allow for cannabis use or cannabis discussion. But sometimes that's your choice. You know, it's, am I gonna follow this and hope for the best, or am I gonna make sure I have shelter and food?
Well, what are some of your lobbying activities in you primarily focus your attention in Massachusetts. What are some of your lobbying activities to promote the active and prolific use of marijuana?
MassCan is set up as an educational organization, so we do not fund lobbying. We do contribute to lobby days at the State House. We attend press conferences. We attend different events, educational events. We are holding screenings for films. We have one coming up very shortly.
What's that going to be about?
Oh, he's going to be mad at me. It's the Culture High, and it's at the Coolidge Corner. It's on Facebook. There's a screening for the Culture High that MassCan is hosting. You can find all the details on our social media and on our. It's the first thing you would see if you went to our website, which is masscan.org. But yes, we do more educational activities, trying to get the community to come together and learn about cannabis and what and how it affects us and in your town, your county.
And how do you find are people receptive to this? Do you see it really becoming a decriminalized activity in Massachusetts?
It is decriminalized.
Well, it's decriminalized, but you don't see it on a recreational basis to the extent that it. I mean, do you?
I would argue that
am I unaware that there's a revolution there?
Yes. I'm pretty sure that any beautiful day that you went to the Common and you head up to the monument, you will find at around 4 o'clock, you will find a lot of people joining together to practice civil disobedience against the prohibition of cannabis out in the public.
Prohibition of smoking in parks in general.
Yeah. Yeah, no smoking at all. It's crazy. But yeah, any beautiful day that you go to the Common around 4 o'clock, you will find lots of people practicing civil disobedience. I think that in Massachusetts, there's a lot of scofflaws, and it's primarily because there's minimal enforcement, and most people in Massachusetts just don't agree anymore. They refuse to follow bad policy.
Eric, this is the personal use. What about what struggles do you have in Massachusetts and in developing a more profitable industry that you're trying to work with?
Well, as I mentioned, at this point, farmers in most states aren't allowed to grow the crop. And so if you're a company that's looking to manufacture something out of it, you got to go to places like China or Europe or Canada and other places like that to source your materials. You got to pay extra to ship it over. You got to deal with import duties and and all the headaches that go with that, lead times. So when you're talking about industrial hemp, those are the challenges. I mean, in addition to that, you can't do research on it. So it's only this year for the first time. I don't know how many people in the audience know this, but the 2014 Farm Bill that President Obama signed into law actually included a provision that allows for research and pilot programs on industrial hemp. And in states that authorize it, and there's a handful of them that have started doing that, including Kentucky, Vermont, and Colorado, and there's others that are looking at doing it as well. So we're hoping that we'll see some real progress on this. But one of the other things I guess I'd like to mention it too is that cannabis isn't just about getting high. There's a whole array of cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. And I know that some people are looking, for example, with industrial hemp at it typically has a higher amount of cannabidiol, CBD, and there's some pretty incredible medicinal properties and other potential properties that people are discovering with that. There's a lot of children that have got various seizure conditions like Dravet syndrome or epilepsy. They're finding it can be very helpful for that where other medicines aren't working. And so there's some real potential here, in other areas. I certainly believe in personal freedom, but I think that if you look at the broader picture in cannabis, it's a pretty amazing plant.
Well, do you see that the corporate and pharmaceutical industries are really looking for the lion's share of profits in this? It sounds like you've got a very potentially profitable industry, and you're looking, Kara, at something that has to do more with the libertarian instinct in people on the street. Are your organizations coordinating with one another?
Our specific organizations don't spend a lot of time coordinating with each other necessarily, but I've definitely worked with people at Normal. Normal focuses a little bit more on specific policies they're looking to do, but they also advocate for industrial hemp, and we're just a little more hemp focused. And what we found is, with legislators, like I said, that they're kind of looking to separate the issues and then and work on them that way. So that's just the way we focus. And HIA, for example, is a trade association of businesses that are focusing on making hemp products. But there is a crossover, as I mentioned, with cannabinoids, and there are members that are starting to take a look at that now, and our association with the possibilities of extracting, for example, CBD, which is a non-psychoactive cannabinoid that can be very, helpful for a variety of conditions, or may even be, the federal government, even the Health and Human Services Department, even has a patent on CBD as a neuroprotectant. So there's definitely, even though the government has consistently said that they don't think cannabis has any medicinal value, or at least the DEA anyways, maybe there's more to the story than what they're saying.
Mike, where's the trend nationally? I mean, is the trend that how many states are there that legalize marijuana and that legalize this production of hemp and these industrial interests that Eric are talking about?
You guys would probably know the exact number. I think it's 14 that have medicinal marijuana. Is that right? That
21.
Might be under. Yeah.
21 and DC have medical marijuana. I think.
And what does that mean? What does that mean, medical marijuana? Does that mean that you have to have a doctor's prescription?
Usually it's a recommendation. Prescriptions are regulated by the DEA. So they have recommendations predominantly. And either it's a state that is trying to or has implemented a method for patients to go to their doctors to get the recommendation with a system that is likely tracking them. Not all of them, like Maine doesn't have a tracking system. They don't. It's optional whether or not you want the state of Maine to know that you use medically. And then following that, there's a system where you can acquire it legally within the state.
Oh, are there courses? I mean, it seems puzzling to me. My son came up to me a short while ago and he said, "Daddy, I've got this chronic issue and I want to go to my pediatrician, and he says that he'll write a prescription or give me permission." Now, there aren't courses in medical school, I doubt, or at least there weren't when a lot of these doctors were licensed, on the implications and the uses of marijuana. There's no regulation that you have to take courses in order to prescribe it. Isn't that sort of opening up a real problem when any doctor can suggest that this is a recommendation and give somebody free access to marijuana?
Well, in Massachusetts...
And I'm not telling you whether I'm for or against it.
In Massachusetts, part of the regulation stipulates that the doctor can't recommend for something that's outside of their specialty. So somebody with chronic, doctor who focuses in on chronic pain issues in patients would not recommend for somebody who has a broken arm, because that would be a short-term use versus a long-term use. That doctor is probably abnormal. It would be abnormal for somebody with a broken arm to go see a chronic pain specialist, because you still have the broken arm. You don't have the chronic pain yet. You have pain because your arm's broken. So there is that side of it. And then you're right. There is not enough medical education for doctors. But I believe that there are many, many doctors in this state who have educated themselves to the best of their abilities and read through studies and research and this and that and the other medical journals about cannabis, and when they feel comfortable with it, they will recommend. And there's a lot more doctors that won't. With Boston being such a hub for hospitals, most of our hospitals have federal funding. So for me, for instance, my doctors would not recommend cannabis for me. They told me, all of them said, "It seems to be working for you. Keep going." I said, "Great, get me my recommendation." They said no. And that's because the hospital that they work for refuses to give them permission to write my recommendation, even though they will recommend it verbally to me.
I'm sorry, Don, if I can just interject. According to the internet, which is never wrong, apparently there are 23 states in DC that now have some form of legalized marijuana. Don, we had another pre-recorded tweet question, if you wouldn't mind entertaining it. They said, Colorado weed sellers can't get bank loans. How can we do better?
The issue there is that it's still fully and supported by the federal government to outlaw this. The Drug DEA is still completely against it. The political powers that be are still completely against it. So a bank teller that took money from a legal shop in Colorado, state level legal, is still facing federal money laundering charges. So if you're just the bank teller that's taking this bag of cash from someone at a completely state level legal and regulated tax shop, you could still potentially open yourself up to federal money laundering schemes, operating with all these different things. So no banks really want to interact with it. There's credit card issues. The Fed at one point came out saying that they were going to loosen it up and allow some more interactions between banks. And then, it sort of turned around that that's not actually what's happening. And, they're still arresting people that are operating state-level legal stores.
Mike, what's the tax that, what's the tax issue? How are states dealing with taxing marijuana for use in an industry like Eric's, or for medical purposes, or for just recreational use?
Well, for example, recreationally, in Washington and Colorado are the two main states that have legalized recreational use of marijuana. Colorado has a couple different levels of taxes: a 15% excise tax, a 10% sales tax, the 3.6% sales tax, plus a local level tax, which is I think like 3.5% in Denver. So you're looking at an effective 29% tax rate in Colorado. In Washington, on the other side, they have 3 levels of 25% tax. So production, processing, and retail, you're looking at 25% plus a 6.5% sales tax, which is more like a 44% sales tax. So by putting these high level of taxes on it, you're really muting one of the main arguments for the legalization of marijuana, which is elimination of the black market. Getting this out in the light, allowing for transparency, to see quality of product, to keep track of this, make sure you're getting something that you're actually trying to buy. In Colorado, I've seen estimates that 60% of the market is currently legal, so 40% of people are still seeing that they can either get better marijuana or cheaper marijuana on the streets, going into an alley. Now you don't have to worry about tax, you don't have to worry about your huge upfront fees to get a license to sell, all these type of things. And in Washington, I've seen some stuff where they're talking about how these dispensaries are now going to be more tourist spots. Anyone local can get something better and cheaper on the street, so they're going to continue doing that. Whereas, someone coming from out of state will go to these stores now and pay this higher price. I was looking at it, and if you're price for an ounce of marijuana in Massachusetts is about $3.50. So in Colorado, that's looking at about $100 tax. In Washington, it's getting up more like $150 and above. So people just don't want to pay these costs on top of it. There's no reason for them to go into a legal store. Yes, they have less chance of getting arrested, but the chance of getting arrested in Colorado for buying on a street isn't all that great. The enforcement's not as strong.
Well, is tax an incentive for the state to be involved in this industry, or is it a disincentive?
It certainly was originally. If you look at Washington in like 2012, when they were still, trying to get this ballot measure passed, there were huge revenue projections. $1.2 billion over some period of time. Colorado, it was 110 million, something like that. You look at Colorado now, they have 7 months of revenue in. It looks like they'll probably get it in something around like $61 million in revenue. So, it's definitely a big selling point, but I think it's one of the weaker selling points for it.
Just one last point. Do you think in the next 4 or 5 years, how many states, you say 2 now, have legalized recreational use? What do you think is the trend going on? You study this.
I think it's certainly going to go up. Alaska has an ballot measure. Oregon, there's a couple other states. I'm sure you know those better.
We are having Massachusetts.
We're probably going to have it on by 16 as well.
In 2016.
There was a Suffolk poll that just came out that said 54% in favor of legalization. DC, it's even polling higher. Although they can't tax it because of the home state rule, they're not allowed to do tax measures via ballot measures.
What about Eric, industrial taxation? Is this a something that you have to sort of overcome to I sort of see two two parallel issues that don't really intersect here. An interest in developing an industry that has a, that has a legitimate purpose to it, versus the arguments against, not against you, but against personal use of marijuana. And is taxation an issue that's sort of overwhelming you? Is it a consideration?
I mean, the taxation on industrial hemp products is what you would have on any other product. So, if you've got a food product at Whole Foods, they've got 300 some SKUs of hemp products. If you walk into your local Whole Foods store, they're going to charge the same tax on those products as they do on any other product. So there's no differentiation there, unlike what's happening here on the medical and recreational side, where it appears they're putting on some pretty huge taxes.
If Mike says that there are 2 states and possibly 4 or 5, in the foreseeable future on the recreational use, what is it industrially for you? How many states are sort of accepting the hemp industry as a profitable and legal business?
Well, the big difference is that for hemp right now, all we have is what's basically research and pilot programs. So there's some limited commercial production that's happening in Kentucky and Colorado, but for the most part, it's still very much limited to research, and we want to see that change. We've got some legislation pending in Congress. We're hopeful that we can actually push it to the next step, but it's definitely much more limited, and it's not going to open things up until that changes and they allow.
What are you telling people that the products that we can use from hemp would be, so they'll go out and lobby their legislators?
There's thousands of products that you can do from hemp. As I mentioned, you can go to your local co-op or your Whole Foods, and there's hundreds of products for everything from soap to all sorts of food products, cereals. You can do paints and varnishes. You could do auto parts. Your BMW 3 Series car that's sitting out on the street, the door panels are made out of hemp. You've got, a carpet can be made out of hemp. Walls can be made out of hemp. They're actually building houses now across Europe out of hempcrete material, which is a blend of hemp, the core or the woody part of the stem, and lime. And it's actually super energy efficient, and it's a really, there's some pretty amazing things that could be happening with hemp if we were doing it here right now.
Don, we've got one more pre-treated question, and then maybe you'd like to open the mics up.
Sure. Did you want to look like you were ready to attack somebody?
No. I think that the hemp industry and the medical marijuana industry have a lot of parallels, very specifically because through processing hemp, and you can remove these CBDs in various forms and oils from the hemp plant, those can be broken down into CBD-only medications for patients who prefer to use CBDs that don't have any of the psychoactive THC in it. So I think that those two run very parallel to each other.
And that's part of your educational effort to try to promote the understanding of the use of these products, other than just smoking pot on the street, and that's great.
Well, keep in mind too that the current prohibition has limited research to such a great degree that a lot of the things that are being discovered now, what's happening in Colorado is, fortunately, there's people, businesses that are coming in and doing this research finally, but it's still in a gray area. I mean, the federal government still is just sort of allowing this experiment to happen, but same thing goes with hemp. We haven't been able to do much with it here, and other countries are working with it and getting the opportunity to get a huge lead on us. I mean, Canada, they grew 100,000 acres of hemp this year, and they're exporting all the hemp seed that's coming down here, and seed oil that's coming down here is coming from Canada, and they're building an industry on it. So we're missing out on that opportunity. Same thing, anyways. That research could be happening here. We need to end that prohibition on on that reason.
Isn't that interesting? Well, people have.
Sorry, yeah. I'm sorry, Don. Before we get into that, there's one more pre-tweeted question, and the question is, what do you think of the Northeastern Institute of Cannabis? And Kara and Michael probably have heard of this. If they also, folks here, if you read The Dig, there's always an ad in there recently. For Eric, who's not from here, it appears that the Northeastern Institute of Cannabis is a school of sorts that trains one to run their own cannabis business. I should say now it is not affiliated with Northeastern University. So the question is, what do you think of this?
Somebody take a picture. I'm probably biased. I'm the school administrator for the Northeastern Institute of Cannabis.
Did you tweet this question?
I did not. I don't even have my phone. I did not tweet this question. But that's my boss.
What does it do, Kara?
So Northeastern Institute of Cannabis is a career training school for the medical marijuana industry here in Massachusetts and New England. We have created a 12-course curriculum that encompasses hemp, industry, business, science, safety, patient services, and it's about 50 hours of training altogether with an exam. We hope to be able to be preparing people to work in serving patients. It's very much important for people who are working in dispensaries and servicing patients to understand what they are dispensing. My favorite analogy is you don't want to give grandma a 250 milligram brownie because she will never use cannabis again. Even if it's a great medicine, she's going to have a very interesting 36 hours. So it's really important that anybody who's dispensing cannabis has a very firm, expansive understanding of how the plant interacts with the body and how it interacts with different ailments and diseases, symptoms, etc. So.
Any doctors enrolled in that?
Actually, our medical marijuana teacher is Dr. Uma Dhanabalan. So she's originally from Washington State.
Okay, if folks are interested, please don't be shy. You can approach one of the microphones or continue to tweet me questions if you have questions.
Sir.
I'm reminded of the time I was walking down a street in Roxbury and two police officers I know rolled down the window to say hello, and the contraband that they had seized came out the window. They were sampling it. The greatest damage, I think, done by prohibition has been on young people who, it was the gateway to prison, to a destroyed life. And I wonder where we are in Massachusetts. Now that it's a civil infraction to possess a small amount and smoke it, and as you said, enforcement is lax, where are we with dealing, street dealing, as far as enforcement? And does your organization advocate along with people who want to protect young people from being hassled, arrested, and ruined? Do you advocate together? Because to me, that's the social harm of that is much worse than even, of course, than the use. Thanks.
Well, it's definitely a gateway to prison. It's also a gateway to not getting FAFSA. So if you have drug convictions, you cannot get federal funding for school. So someone who could be a genius and cure cancer can't go to college because they got caught with a joint. That's absurd. But MassCan has worked on different projects with student groups. We've worked with SU Normal. We work with UMass CRC. We've worked with Students for Sensible Drug Policy chapters. So absolutely, MassCan does not think that youth should be tied up in legal battles because of cannabis use, that it definitely is an educational issue.
And sale, talking about sale, too.
And
Dealer is still facing felony conviction, are they not?
Yes, I mean, we advocate for the legal, excuse me, the legal sale of cannabis. Obviously, I don't necessarily think that MassCan would say we advocate for dealers, for street dealers. I would say that if there's a legal case, we'd want to help them find somebody to represent them to get the best possible outcome. But we advocate, acknowledge civil disobedience as a form of protest to bad policy.
Next question, sir.
We heard the freedom argument raised here at the beginning. Should have the right to do with one's body as one chooses, particularly drugs. Does this also apply to every other drug? All the so-called much more dangerous drugs than marijuana and alcohol? You defend the right to use all of those drugs on the freedom principle?
The Massachusetts Cannabis Reform Coalition does not have a stance on drugs aside from cannabis. MassCan does not take a stand on
I'm asking your position, your personal view.
Not as the president of MassCan, I don't think prohibition works in any shape. I think that decriminalization is a far better option for all drugs.
Well, you made a strong argument.
As we've seen in Portugal.
We've really got, if you want to finish your question, please feel free to finish your question, but rather than she's stated what her position is, and is that the end of the question?
Are you finished answering that?
I think so.
You have no position on legalizing all drugs?
Me personally, I personally think that decriminalization is a better option than legalization or prohibition right now.
I've seen some of Normal's writings on the matter of traffic accidents and marijuana use who've tried to minimize the effects of using marijuana in traffic accidents. Are you prepared to have legalization, but the book thrown at those who use marijuana who cause traffic accidents, just like alcohol users?
I don't think anyone's ever advocated for the legalization of driving intoxicated. I don't think any current proposal I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, there's a complete difference between choosing what you do to yourself and deciding to get behind a 2-ton car, when you're not with it.
So pot users should have the book thrown at them when they cause traffic accidents?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, if you're at fault, if you're not, sound mind and body or whatever you want to say as it, yeah.
And finally,
Go ahead. Good. Finish your last thought.
we've done a very good job of driving out cigarette smokers from public places because of their nauseating, obnoxious stench. Do you potheads accept that you also should be prohibited from using your nauseating drugs in the same places that we prohibit cigarette smokers? When you want to do your thing, getting high?
Let's let that be, sir. That's a question, and do we have an answer?
No.
Does anybody? Does anybody have any comment on whether or not the restrictions on smoking should apply also to smoking marijuana?
I think you should be able to smoke cigarettes as long as you're outdoors, and I think you should be able to smoke anything you want outdoors.
Okay. Ma'am, do you have a question? Thank you, sir.
So we were just talking about cigarettes a little, and I think a lot of people are aware that most commercially available cigarettes, which have been legalized, regulated, and taxed, et cetera, have a lot of additives in them that are very toxic. Some of them are carcinogenic. And I guess my question is, if you are successful in your goals of having marijuana more fully legalized, how do you think you could prevent that becoming a similar problem?
I think transparency. I mean, part of the thing of making it legal and taking it out of the black market is that there is now a process that you can see exactly what goes into what you're buying. Now you're just buying from some random dude on a corner, in a back alley somewhere. You don't know what went into that. If it was legalized, people know that there's toxic things in cigarettes. If they choose to self-smoke it, that's certainly their choice. They can buy, just leaf tobacco, roll their own cigarettes if they want to eliminate those, and I think that's great. But that transparency is there, and I think that same exact thing will come through in any regulated, any legalized industry. Any food that you buy, you know what goes into it, and that same thing I imagine will carry through.
I think there's also an aspect of the cannabis culture that has developed over the past 50, 60 years. I don't think that they'd have, that should there be additives that are unpleasant, that those brands would be very popular in any way. I think that the culture of cannabis users would put them out of business very quickly.
Let me ask you this. So that's an interesting question. If you took those states, you say there are 2 states now that legalize the recreational use of marijuana. Have there been any, how many years, has there been any follow-up, any statistics on harm that it's caused by being legal for the period of time that it has been in those states?
It's been less than a year. I don't think they've had a whole lot of time to really.
But there's certainly countries, there's countries that it might not be legalized, but it's not frowned upon or it's not quite as punished. If you went to Amsterdam or the Netherlands, it's still illegal to buy, sell, consume, whatnot there. They just turn a blind eye to that. That's their official policy. And it's been that way for many years. So, I mean, there's certainly studies of that I don't think have seen anything near close to the damage of what you see with like alcohol and other things that are consumed.
Portugal decriminalized all drugs, I think 12 or 13 years ago now, and they saw a massive drop in HIV and hepatitis C, hepatitis C
Transmission.
Thank you. Through intravenous drug use. So taking stigma out and out of drugs will keep people from being harmed by them.
Plus, you're moving to a policy as opposed to the jailing of someone that might be, addicted to a drug, marijuana, might be dependent on that type of thing. You're changing your policy towards them as opposed to locking them up and then releasing them into the wild again at some point, to where it can be treated as a sickness. You won't be prosecuted if you come forward as someone that believes I'm smoking too much marijuana. You can come forward, not worry about being jailed, and you can have these, you can have the benefits of this being transparent now. You can talk to your doctor about, if you're coughing more, something like that, and you aren't quite as scared as saying, I smoke marijuana. And maybe he'll point to you, inhaling smoke isn't the greatest idea to deal with that.
Sir.
Yes, a question is, marijuana is legalized in 2 states, federal government doesn't. Does the marijuana community, pro, con, feel any obligation to deal with the thousands, if not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people of color and poor people that are in prison because of possession of marijuana and non-drug things? It seems to me to be highly hypocritical to move ahead and legalize a drug and leave somebody rotting in a prison because they're doing something that's now legal. And I think the current administration has done some work towards equalizing drug penalties for different drugs, but it's just so far off and so unfair. And if you know history at all and you look back to the history of making marijuana illegal, it was trumped up then, it's trumped up now. But it's a class issue, it's an issue of people of color, it's an issue of people who can't afford lawyers, it's an issue of people pursuing an agenda against people. And when you talk about Netherlands and other countries where the police just turn a blind eye, that doesn't work in the long run because they don't turn a blind eye to everybody. They pick where to enforce it. And I think strongly this community has, to a large degree from what I've read and seen and followed, has not joined in that issue. And I think that's morally questionable, that you have an obligation, whether you're bringing in legalized marijuana for recreation use or medical use, to address the issue about your fellow citizens who are locked up in jail for using the product you're advocating.
Kara,
Thank you.
How do you see that inconsistency?
No, it's a fantastic point. This is not something that has not been discussed among activists in Massachusetts and New England specifically. I don't talk too much to the activists in Colorado, but there does need to be reform after the fact of people who are in on prison sentences that are incredibly long for virtually nothing. And we do need to stop having police go into low-income communities and looking for people to arrest, looking to make their quotas, looking to get their drug catch notches, to find the stash and find the money. I mean, once we end prohibition and we take away that the police can go into someone's house and take all of their stuff and all of their money, they're going to lose a lot of funding. That is not something they're going to like, but they, there's a variety of issues that are going to be long-term with the legalization of cannabis.
Mike-
And that is definitely one of them.
Mike, what do you, what statistically, how do you deal? That man's question is a very interesting one.
That's not something I know too much about. I mean, there's people locked up in state jail in Colorado for breaking a law that no longer exists. I don't know what they have planned for that. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly a large nonviolent community in jails and prisons across the U.S. that are, were arrested, and have been in jail for things that are now legal in Colorado, and they're sitting in jail in Colorado, which I think is quite, I have no idea how that'll be dealt with. But that's certainly one of the, main economic costs, is you're taking away people's productive years of their lives for committing a crime that had no victim.
Sir.
Hi, I just wondered what you guys thought, or if you could just talk about what you think about how the federal government has patents on cannabis as a medicine, but then also demonizes it as a Schedule I drug, and also how cannabis with hemp in World War II, how they, hemp for victory, they needed it, for cordage and all that. So if you guys just could talk about that.
For what, please?
For cordage,
okay.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. The government has been pro-cannabis when it was convenient, and World War II was a great example. They did have a huge campaign to grow hemp for the war. They grew a few 100,000 acres, and it was only after the Japanese cut off the supply of manila fiber, hemp, it's a banana fiber coming from the Philippines, and they said, oh, well, now we need to grow it for the war here, and it's a patriotic duty to grow hemp, and it's super ironic that they had filmed a video to get farmers to grow it and everything, and then after the war was over, they just dropped it again. So, and I agree with you, and it is really ironic as well that they've actually patented CBD, and yet they're claiming that it has no medicinal value. So, I think that the policy is clearly bankrupt.
Kara, do you have any comment on that?
The government.
Sir, please.
Yeah, I think what Eric just brought up was a great, one of my favorite terms in kind of like the industrial hemp world is the catch for 22, with the kind of, the hemp for victory video that came out for the war. And then now we're back to the times of where we can't necessarily have it. But speaking about the industrial hemp world, it's an extremely interesting thing that I've found very intriguing to think about and to kind of talk about, because you have this world of recreational cannabis that people are going to use to enjoy or medicinally, personally. But then you have the industrial hemp world, which is also cannabis, but it's the world that people don't necessarily talk about. The legalize it that Peter Tosh was referencing had nothing to do with industrial hemp. It was all the stuff that, he wanted to have fun with, basically. So when it comes to industrial hemp, the way that we go about kind of legalizing it, there it is kind of, it's completely different than the way that we're going to legalize cannabis. Cannabis legalization is never going to happen on the federal scale. It's never going to go through legislation. We see bills be passed up through the ranks, but they always die. They're always tabled. So the only way that cannabis legalization is going to happen in this country is that if we see states do it through voter initiatives and ballot initiatives, like Massachusetts in 2016, where it will be legalized in this state. But for hemp, do you ever see that becoming an option for the states to vote on it following this kind of legalization parade that we're starting to take as a country, but as individual states? And I know you said there's a bill going through Congress right now, but is that really going to make a difference, or is it going to kind of succumb to kind of the woes that cannabis legalization bills have seen in the past? Basically, my last question, how are we going to legalize industrial hemp, and when are we going to be able to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. In the current political climate at the federal level, it's so difficult to move any legislation whatsoever. And if you take a look at what's happening in Congress, I mean, we were so fortunate to be able to get a provision into the Farm Bill, which was one of the only pieces of legislation that actually moved. And, the standalone bill that we have in Congress is extremely unlikely to ever get a hearing or have a vote. But what we can do with that is educate, build support. We've got 50 co-sponsors on that bill, Republicans and Democrats. We put on amendments. We had amendments to the, there was a appropriations bill that put money together for the Justice Department and the DEA this year, and we put what's called a limiting amendment out on the floor through a couple of our supporters, Representative Massey from Kentucky and Representative Bonamici from Oregon, and those demonstrate that it's a support. You know, we had 246 members of Congress, for example, voted for that amendment to restrict DEA from using their money that was being appropriated to them to block states from, you know, from implementing their hemp laws or to block the Farm Bill implementation. So I think there's support building for it. And you know, whether or not we're going to be successful this year or next year in finding another opportunity to move legislation forward is difficult to see. You know, we don't even know if what the makeup of the Congress is going to look like after this election.
Eric, as a follow-up to this question, the two states that legalized recreational use of marijuana, Washington and Colorado, what position do they take on hemp?
Both of them did effectively legalize hemp, and so in Colorado they were very explicit about it. They dealt with it by defining hemp, you know, and directing the legislature in Colorado to create regulations for it, which they very quickly did. They kind of separated it up and worked on the marijuana regulations through one track and the hemp regulations through a different one. And they've, you know, those have now been implemented. The Department of Agriculture in Colorado has, you know, you can apply for a license. In Washington State, they didn't ever mention the word hemp. They just defined cannabis of 0.3% THC or less as not being marijuana, and the legislature has yet to take any action, so it's kind of a lot more murky there.
And is it a profitable industry in those states?
Well, in Colorado, it's just getting started. I mean, the first legal crops were planted this year. There's still a lot of problems. I mean, the DEA still regulates the ability to import the seed. So there's not a lot of legal sources of seed, and the DEA is still standing in the way in a lot of ways of the industry moving forward because of that.
Last question. Is it the same groups that are lobbying for the recreational use of marijuana lobbying for the industrial use of hemp, or does it just happen coincidentally that those two states adopted those two, accepted those two?
Well, I think they were, I don't know if it had so much to do with lobbying, but I think they were looking comprehensively, the people that put those initiatives together were looking comprehensively at their cannabis policy, and I think they included hemp because they thought it made sense to, you know, maybe it also increased support for their legislation or whatever their thinking was, you know. Certainly, we endorsed Amendment 64 in Colorado. You know, we only took a position on the hemp portion of it, but we went out and endorsed it. We thought it was a great step forward, and we're excited that Colorado's got that opportunity to, you know, to develop.
Do you have any idea the number of representatives that were behind that hemp bill that smoked marijuana?
You know, I don't know. We've never had anybody actually come out and talk about that one, so I have no idea.
Are there any other questions?
Could I have a follow-up question to that, actually?
Yes.
Sorry. So to that, I mean, just you talking about that and with the Colorado and having the language with industrial hemp kind of like in their bill, is that a strategy in the industrial hemp political game in a sense of, you know, riding the coattails of these legalization bills that are going through these states and being like, hey, let's work together. Would you mind if I put in my language into your bill? Has that ever been a strategy, or has that always been the strategy, or is that maybe going to be the strategy in the future?
Well, you know, these marijuana legalization bills have only come up just recently. It hasn't really been our strategy. We've been working through state legislatures, primarily trying to get states to pass laws through the legislative process. We've never done a hemp-only initiative or anything like that. So, but we're certainly open to working with states if if there's initiatives that are coming forward. You know, we're not opposed to that as a strategy to change the policy for hemp.
Just real quick, and I don't know, maybe other people know this, but you've talked about hemp. Are there other industries out there that use the cannabis that are competitive industries to the hemp industry?
Other industries use.
In other words, are there other industries that create that have a market for cannabis other than, you know, its recreational use that are competitive with the hemp industry?
My sense is no, that it's not really a competitive thing. I think there's a lot of people looking in the cannabis space, and some people have gravitated towards hemp because, because of these other cannabinoids, as I mentioned, because hemp is so low in the psychoactive, you know, it's worthless as a, to get high with. But I haven't really sensed that there's a big competition like that now. I don't feel like that's the case.
Sir?
I guess the question I have is, if setting aside the question of whether or not marijuana is socially bad, like setting aside that question, suppose that it was.
Could you raise your voice just a little bit, please?
So setting aside the question of whether or not marijuana is socially bad, supposing for sake of argument even that it was, and I think this is something that you've talked about, prohibition doesn't actually work. And it's incredibly expensive. I mean, you mentioned, the DEA's ditchweed busts. I guess my question is, how much of the work and the activism that you're doing becomes activism not about marijuana, not about hemp, but about effective governance? Because part of the problem is even just that whether or not marijuana is bad, the attempts to control it have been misguided, they've been ineffective. Even if marijuana were a terrible thing, the money would have been better spent on something else. Education, schools, I don't care, anything. So I guess the question is, how much do you end up shaving the yak of trying to solve problems with government instead of solving anything really about marijuana?
Oh, this is a question you love, Kara.
Oh, well, I think before we have legalization, that it's all about getting the government to turn their cheek. How we are going to convince the federal government to redirect funds after legalization is definitely going to be a challenge, and actually not a question I've really put a lot of thought into yet. We've only got 2 states.
One step at a time, right?
Yeah, I'm personally more focused on Massachusetts and New England at the moment, but yeah, they allocate about 80% of the funds for the DEA goes to cannabis enforcement, and that's absurd. So we're not going after cocaine coming in through Miami. We're not going to find all of the people who are cooking meth out in the middle of nowhere in their little RV. We're not actually going after dangerous hard drugs because the bulk of the money is going to cannabis, and the bulk of the money goes to cannabis because it's the bulk of the use that's illegal. So once we get rid of the fact that it's illegal, and they don't have to go after cannabis users, they will either have to give up large percentage of their funding and their employees, or they're going to have to redirect all of their efforts into different drug laws to enforce.
Do you have a notion of what is that 80% in millions of dollars? Just so we know.
I don't know.
In Massachusetts, a guy at Harvard called Jeff Mirren looked at state-level spending of enforcement of marijuana, and his estimate is that if marijuana was legal and to the point where we didn't have to enforce any laws against it, the state itself would only save about $100 million. It's not that big. Here at a state level, there's federal spending on top of that. Part of that's probably because he did do his report after it was decriminalized, so there's not a ton of spending on it.
Let's just recognize, though, that Crystal Lisdahl, the director of the Brain Imaging and Neuropsychology Lab at the University of Wisconsin, states that marijuana use is increasing among young people, and brain imaging studies of regular marijuana users have shown significant changes in their brain structures, particularly among adolescents.
Was that the study that came out a couple months back?
Well, I don't know if it came out a couple of months back, but it's a prominent study.
Because I heard about this study, and it wasn't changes, it was differences. So the argument can be made that the people who choose to use cannabis on a regular basis have something different about their brain that makes them more apt to use cannabis, that makes it more pleasurable for them. Then there are people who absolutely cannot stand it. They try it once, it's just awful, they don't like it, and their brains could have something very particular that makes them not like it. So it's not necessarily that the chemicals changing the brain, it could just be that everybody has a different brain.
Sir.
Yeah, actually my question is pretty relevant to what we're talking about now. Often in the media, we see stigma attached to individuals that use cannabis, and there seems to be a perception that individuals that use cannabis are unmotivated or lazy.
Could you raise your voice just a little?
Sorry about that. So in the media, there's often a perception that cannabis smokers are unmotivated or lazy. And I guess my question to the group is, do you think there is a typical marijuana user, or are we seeing more folks use cannabis on a daily basis that span a variety of cultures, a variety of religions, a variety of genders?
Caricatures are an easy thing to sell, especially in the media. So I think they probably stick with that because it's something they can throw out there and not get questioned too much about. But I think widely it's becoming believed that just doesn't hold true. You know, there's more and more people that know people that smoke pot or have smoked pot themselves. And I think that stigma is really losing its steam pretty quick.
Kara, what do you see?
Well, you're the one who told me I didn't look like a stoner.
Oh, you're a promoter.
I don't think that there is a look I think that is long gone. I think that Cheech and Chong was a movie to give you what you think a stoner looks like. It was very popular, very funny movies.
But what about the cultural? I mean, what's the next level of this? I mean, in terms of cultural groups, you know, within the society, is this becoming a rallying cry across the board, or is this something that is you know, is changing? It's a new era than when I grew up.
I think what you're gonna really start noticing as laws change around the country is professionals. Like it's not slackers sitting around getting high all the time. It's people at work with their vape pens figuring out what the next big thing is. And you know, there are people who can work all day and use cannabis all day long, and they're just as great of an employee for it. But there is no more. It's gone. It doesn't exist. Go to the Freedom Rally. You see the look, because a lot of people go dressed as it, but you find those people on Tuesday in the office, and they have a costume that they put on for the Freedom Rally.
I think they're also discovering that.
Are you done, sir?
Yes,
thank you.
Different varieties of cannabis have different effects on people. So, you know, some varieties of cannabis are going to make you, you know, want to lay down on the, you know, couch, and other ones are going to, you know, make you more active. So, I think that, you know, that stereotype may have more to do with, you know, the types of cannabis that make you less active. So,
let's have one more question. Is there anybody that would like to? Any professional out there who's recently changed their focus on the use of marijuana that would like to talk about? No? Yes, all right.
Hi, I'm Michael Latulip. I am the co-founder of the Cannabis Society of Massachusetts. But in my professional career, I'm a software engineer, and I actually run one of the largest groups not only here in Boston around software called Boston Software Engineers, but I also run Bay Area software engineers in Silicon Valley and New York software engineers in New York City. And I've come to the point in my career where I'm thinking about leaving the software business with the information that I have and the people that I know to go and start new ventures in the cannabis world. I'm actually going to be moving to Colorado at the end of the month. And I will announce to my groups when I leave. There's other organizers obviously running them in Silicon Valley and other places when I'm not there. But I'll let everyone know that I'm leaving tech to go into cannabis. It's serious, and you know, my background in technology with 3D printing makes me very interested in hemp, obviously to be used as a substrate material. Automation, robotics, there's so much technology that can be used to make cannabis cheaper, better, that, you know, I feel like if anyone's going to be able to do it, it could be me. So I should probably leave software, get into cannabis. It might be a very good financial move.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Whoever has a phone going off or a radio, please turn it off. I'm sorry. Go on.
Yes. So, so anyway, that's where I am in my life. The Cannabis Society of Massachusetts, we are actually a social club. So we're actually incorporated now here in Mass as a 501c7 social club organization. We just want to have some fun. Obviously, that's all our point of our group. We're not trying to educate, and we're not trying to legislate. We're just trying to have a good time. I would like to call ourselves the Country Club for Cannabis. So if you want to check us out, we're always cool. I'm doing the same thing. I started. I have Open Cannabis as well, which is our New York City, San Francisco organizations. But I just launched in Denver, so I'm going to be moving to Denver. I'm going to be starting my own cannabis dispensary operation, most likely several dispensaries at the same time. The investors that I know in New York that I've acquired through my dealings have interest in getting involved in cannabis. And as we all know, the tech boom right now could very well shrink and fade away because a lot of these startups are burning through cash like crazy. So it might be a good time to invest in something other than technology companies. So that's where I'm at. That's why I'm going to Colorado. So I suppose there, and if you want to check out Can Society, it's cansociety.org. I know I shouldn't promote that. We love Mass Can, by the way, and we're going to the sign-making party tomorrow. We are going to be at the DPH too, so believe me, support these guys here.
Is that a question?
No, I'm just throwing my support. I know Mass Can, and I'd like to talk to you afterwards from the hemp industry and as well, Mass Can. All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I guess what I'd like to do is to thank Eric and Mike and Kara and the audience for such interesting questions, and thank you for letting us be part of your evening tonight.
Thank you all for coming. If you're not a member of the forum, please grab some information on your way out. Good night.